So I'd heard rumors about Ove Tinggaard, but I first set eyes on the man on Sunday, May 13th, 1973. Yes, at Nairobi School. That's when I first saw him, though I'd heard about him. He was a friend of a friend, and that friend was also a friend of my cousin. So my cousin and a friend from Nairobi School introduced me to Ove. Sunday afternoon, that May 1973. And so Ove invited me to listen to a Billy Graham tape. I don't know what the tape was about. I've forgotten everything. But I had heard that Ove was in Nairobi School to help boys know about Jesus, which was something very strange to me because I thought I was always a Christian given my Seventh-day upbringing. So that very same day, I had a bit of a crisis, and I knew that somewhere in the Bible I would find an answer. Nairobi School, we had a chaplain, we had Bibles, so I felt I would find the answer in the Bible, but I had no literacy, nothing to how to find my way around. So I happened to go back to, I went back to the dormitory that evening and I was reading a Gideon's Bible, and I came across Malachi chapter 4 verse 2 about those who feared the name of the Lord, and that to them the Son of Righteousness would rise with healing, and they would go forth like calves leaping from the stall. And that picture of calves leaping from the stall was something I could recognize from my rural background in Kendu Bay. And I said, I wish I was like that. What does that mean? So the next day I saw Ove in his blue Toyota on our campus at Nairobi School. So I went over to him and I said, this verse, I read it and I would like to understand it. So he explained to me the Son of Righteousness is Jesus. And he explained to me how I needed to receive Jesus as my Lord. If I had invited the Son of Righteousness to rise in my life, in my heart, I had asked Jesus to come into my life. So Ove explained the gospel to me. And he took me through the steps of, I don't recall that he actually showed me the bridge illustration, but I know that there were elements of coming to understand who Jesus was, what he had done for me, and what I needed to do to become a Christian. And then after that, so I prayed with Ove. I probably prayed in his car. I don't remember the details right now. That was Monday, the 14th of May, 1973, yes. And so I was then recruited into a Bible study that had Dr. Mutiso, J.K. Mutiso, and there was Julius Musyoka, who's now I think goes by the name Justus. I forget his surname now. But and there was a John Mwongo. John was also in that study. John has now passed on, but John's brother is Richard Mwongo, who is, I think he's now a High Court judge or something. Yeah, so I spent those years in Nairobi School, Form 5, Form 6, in this Bible study that was led by Ove and Mutiso, Musyoka, John, and a few others. And then I was able to then move on into university, having gone through the Design for Discipleship course and learned the basics, scripture memory, quiet time. I attended those initial highlight conferences that Ove used to organize. I believe Jane Awiti, Sarah Mbuye were some of the women in the high school ministry. So the girls' schools, the boys' schools, we'd come together, we'd have these conferences throughout 73 holidays, 74. I don't think they were in 75. Yeah, so So I learned about lordship. That's how I ended up in medicine. For me, coming into medicine was a lordship decision because I had come to understand that part of being a follower of Jesus was that he was Lord. That decision was very much centered on what I had learned from the Bible studies that we were doing with Ove in Nairobi school. Well, yeah, so I got into university, and there was let me backtrack a bit. I should mention Noel Nelson. Noel Nelson was country leader at just about the time I was finishing high school. And I remember he had, there would be somewhat like workshops or afternoon sessions at his house in Lavington. I turned up one day and he said, "Where is my Timothy?" And I somehow, that had escaped me that I was supposed to have a Timothy. So far, I'd been walking with Jesus. I was nearly finishing high school. I didn't have a Timothy. And he said, "Where's your Timothy? Who are you discipling? Who are you helping?" And so I remember going back and saying, okay, this Navigator thing, you've got your verses down. You're a basic disciple, but you don't have a Timothy. So it was a nice challenge. It wasn't legalistic. It wasn't anything bullying or in any sense demanding. It just seemed like a natural thing that you would have a Timothy. So I got praying, and I said, "Lord, as I'm about to leave high school, who am I going to walk with? Who will I look after to pass the faith on to?" I heard about Ishmael Pandey, who had become a Christian, and I went over, started talking to him, sharing with him some of the things that I had learned. And so I was able to eventually show Noel Nelson that I did actually have a Timothy in those days. Yes, so that's a side story there. So university days, I was in university and I met people like Stanley Murage and the likes of Linda Dunn, and I believe that about that time there was some transition with Edstrom's coming into the country, leading the university. That's when I met Esther Waruiru, because she was one of the women leaders on the campus. And I would say those years were important because I learned about the grace of God in ways that I perhaps wouldn't have learned. It was a sad event, but I was walked through a very difficult time with Bruce and the leaders that were on the campus then, among them Esther, Stanley. I believe Jane was part of that group, but I don't fully remember. But that was a special time, because it was also the time that I was trying to become a member of Nairobi Baptist. As I was heading into my university training at Kenyatta Hospital, I had learned that the need to become a member of church, and Bruce was very instrumental in interceding for me on behalf of the church at a difficult time, but also helping me through a painful season in my life. So, but things continued. We were eventually graduating out of university and into the community ministry. And so I got married in '82 to a woman who had been part of the life ministry. It was then called Campus Crusade for Christ. So my wedding was actually a Navigator come Campus Crusade event with lots and lots of support from Nairobi Baptist, but I would say majority of support was Navigators. It was a wedding. It was essentially a Navigator wedding, like many were in those days. But the foundation for my married life was actually laid by the Edstroms. We did a lot of studies then, and they helped us understand what it meant to be Christians in that relationship of marriage. And we did the Bible studies and a lot of counseling and coaching before and after our marriage. So that brings us to about 1982. Yeah, out of Nairobi Baptist, out of counseling with the Navigators and help again through the church, I served with Africa Inland Mission, our Africa Inland Church at Kijabe. And so my wife and I were then involved in using our house to do our home as a Bible study base for nursing school students. So we were taking those things that we had learned from the Navigators in the university and duplicating that in our house with young men and young women. That was a short stint because I came back to Nairobi and did my master's. The other thing that I forgot to mention is around about it was 1975. I think Ove had been to All Saints Cathedral, and he had heard of a young man who had come to Christ, needed help, but didn't have someone to help him. So Ove asked me if I would go over to Jamhuri High School and meet with Peter Buyu. Peter Buyu had just become a Christian. So in that gap between high school and university, Ove gave me this responsibility because I was staying with Ove part of the time in Jamhuri Estate. So I went to Jamhuri High School, found Peter, and we started doing this Bible study in Peter's dad's servants' quarters, because that was Peter's Simba. That's where Peter was staying. So we were doing this Bible study, and his kid brother Moses would come in and say, can I join you guys? And so eventually Moses joined us. And I don't remember the details, but either Moses or Peter asked Nyangao, what was his name then? Ambrose Allen. He was called Ambrose Allen then, to also join the group, because Ambrose was at Jamhuri then. So this group had myself, Peter Buyu, Moses joined us, and of course Ambrose. That group was eventually assigned to Geir Dolmen, who came in from, I think, Norway when I entered university. But my friendship with Peter continued and still continues. And of course with Moses and Alan, that relationship has continued. Yeah, so that was something that happened way back as over-delegated responsibility to me. Yeah, it was a very short stint of leading a ministry, but it became, the friendships lasted. The friendships of course are forever. And as I said, it was actually Geir Dolmen who was a trained staff person, who I think he's the one who really made the investment that developed these men into the godly people they eventually became. Yeah. So you might call me a stopgap, a go-between. It was quite interesting because you can imagine your late teens, you're doing this Bible study, and the mother of Peter became a matron at Nairobi at Kenyatta Hospital. But as a boy, sitting in this little house, trying to do this Bible study, and Mr. Buyu, Peter's dad, was head of Swahili department or language at Jamhuri. You were always scared. You didn't want to go into the main house, but you eventually did. And Peter's house was full of girls. I think Peter and Moses are the only two boys out of maybe seven siblings. So it was always a kind of an interesting thing, avoiding the main house. Only later to realize that Peter's mother would be my supervisor at Kenyatta Hospital when I was studying medicine and rotating through maternity. So yeah, so it was those were times when the Lord was, I guess, forming friendships and forming relationships. You'll probably hear about Peter and the awards and what happened in Kisumu High and subsequent stories, but that's a different line. Yeah, so after Kijabe, we moved to Eldoret, I had done my master's. We moved to Eldoret because the Navigators were starting a team there. A medical school was coming up. And so I was part of the team with Bruce Nygaard, Jack Wong, and Dennis Tongoy. And we were the non-staff people, and we were trying to help get involved with medical students. And later on, we were able to be part of the community ministry with couples. So I was able to lead that and take the things that I had learned from the Edstroms and do that with a couples study that we led. And some of the things I had picked up from high school and of course from university, then we were applying that with medical students that were the first cohort at Moi University. And that continued until I left Moi, the ministry to medical students that I was participating in there. I was given a chance to lead the ministry for a short while after the missionary staff left. And then that was with Tom. And then eventually when we left, I believe the Navigators asked Tom to take up the leadership. 1990, July of 1990. Yes, Dennis had already gone there. I believe Bruce was already there. Yes, it was just starting, but we were not the first ones. We were coming in after others who were already in the town. Yes, we were in Eldoret up to 2005. Actually, 2004. Yes, we left Eldoret in end of 2004. Were in Nairobi for 6 months and then came to Canada in 2005. After a stint of teaching at Moi University, I had my sabbatical. Our children were ready for college, and we were wondering what the next steps would be, and that's how we ended up in Canada, summer of 2005, June 2005. And how did we end up where we ended up? Probably early 2000 and I think it was early 2004 or 2003. Let me backtrack. Let me backtrack a bit. We had felt that part of our heritage, part of our, I would say maybe part of our discipleship was that medicine was going to be an instrument or a tool that God was going to use as a vehicle for ministry. It never came to us as this is the end of the story. You know, this, you're a doctor, you're done. There was I would say an underlying belief that it was going to be something for God to use. And we had, as far back as 1983, explored the possibility of going full-time with Navigators or going part-time with Navigators. And Mike Trenier had asked me, together with a few others, I suspect Dennis Tongoy might have been one of those, to look into openings in Central and South Africa. So we went to Zambia. I went to Zambia and I went to Zimbabwe. We had been exploring this possibility that Navigators would start work there. I didn't go to Namibia, but I think Namibia was one of the countries that were looked at. And so following that, with that in mind, we kept this in the back of our heads that eventually or at some point, this might be something that we would have to do. But it didn't happen because in 1984, it was clear to the Navigators that that was not the time for myself and Lydia to be on staff. We began to pray about missions to those countries that had been explored in 1983 under Mike Trenier. Mike was looking at expanding the Africa work. So those countries that we were looking at, we began praying about them, and we ended up one conference, if not 2002, 2003 at Brackenhurst. there'd been this group. I think Paul was one of the people who was praying, and I know David Oduno was praying, and that's how David, I think, ended up in Botswana. We ended up nowhere in Africa. But when my sabbatical came, we had this opportunity to come to Canada. That was my chance then to work with the Navigators, because we were thinking of coming here not for the Navigators, but for our children and for my sabbatical. But one of the Navigators in Canada, and he might have been, I suspect he may have been on the board, but he was definitely with the Navigators in Canada. He ended up in Eldoret looking for help, and he needed somebody to take him by the hand and show him some things, and because he was inquiring about a ministry there that had shown interest in partnership with Canadians. So we had this. I had this man, and he told me about the Navigators, and I said, "Well, of course I'm with the Navigators." And he was with the Navigators in Canada, and he said, I told him about our trip to Canada, our coming to Canada, and he said, "I'll set you up. I will set you up with everything you need. Just don't go to the province you had in mind. You're coming to Ontario." So this fellow Navigator set us up, and he organized for me to have a place in Canada, for a place to land in. He plugged us in with the Navigators immediately. He plugged us in with the church. The chair of the board of that church was also chair of the board of the Navigators. So we immediately plugged in, and I started having an investigative Bible study in my house, which was an interesting story because I wasn't planning it, but a young man came from Indonesia. He wrote to the Navigators through the internet, and he says, "Are there any Navigators around where I'm living?" And we were very new to Canada, but the Canadian Navigators said to this young man, there's a Kenyan who's just landed, he's with the Navigators, here's how to find him. So that was the start of my Navigator ministry or participation here with young Indonesians doing investigative studies. But the other opportunity grew out of that, that then allowed me to work at University of Toronto as a Navigator rep, primarily to medical students, partly because my salary was coming from the Canadian Medical and Dental Association. So then my focus was medical students, but I had a ministry outside of medical school as well. So that was 2006 until 2013. Some of those days, some of those years, I was part-time because I was still looking at the possibility of coming into medicine. But some of those were full-time Nav rep at the University of Toronto. Yeah, so that brings us to 2013. The days at the University of Toronto were very, very rewarding. And apart from my Canadian boss, Esther Waruiru was our regional boss. So whenever Esther was in town overseeing Canadian work, we would get together. And I was the only person who could pronounce Waruiru among the Canadian Navigators. But, there was this special bond, of course. We had grown up together. She was a year or two ahead of me in the Navs in Kenya, but coming here, working together, it's almost like I had an inside track. Like I was this Timothy, but I was actually among the apostles because of my connection with Esther. And, so that was a blessing in those days to have her leadership, her oversight. So that was very special. Yeah, so I said we have 10 years to go, 10 years left. So I joined. I came out of Navigators in middle of 2013, early 2013. It must have been around March, May there. We had actually been to Kenya in 2012. My wife and I, we'd had some discussion with, among others, Mukolwe, Mutiso, and Aluvala about the phase of life where I was going through and some of the challenges I was facing. And so I came out of the Navigators following that visit in June of 2013. I left the Navigators and I joined EMAS Canada. So this Christian organization that came out of the Medical and Dental Fellowship of Canada serves in those countries we were mentioning earlier. I say from A to Z just because of Aruba to Zimbabwe. But in between, there are very few countries. It's not a very large organization. And it does medical missions through teams. Long-term engagement, although the teams are short-term missions. We've done this for 76 years. Of course, I've only been there for 10 years of those 76 years, but the core is that, these teams work together. They go to the same place over and over again. They form these relationships. And they serve as healthcare professionals doing teaching, sometimes actually treating patients, but now mostly teaching, medical teaching, some care for pastors, retreats for pastors and their spouses, some discipleship programs. So we're looking at, what does the future look like? But the past has been very rich, and actually the present is working well, because I was blessed in the days of my youth to come to love the scriptures and to come to have my own tools for engaging with the scriptures. So currently I lead this group that is very ecumenical, so non-denominational that the entire spectrum of Christendom might be represented here. Now, we do come out of the Protestant evangelical side of the spectrum, and we're deeply rooted in our understanding of the gospel, its essence, its importance, and that's why we exist. And I found that the thing that I was very blessed with in not just from the fact that I met Ove through my cousin and a friend, but that I experienced some of the richest blessings through my relationship with the Buyus and the Owors and some of the things that were happening. But the relationships that are natural and are already there, either from family or from work, are so crucial to building ministry teams. And every place in EMAS Canada where I have found that I can call upon people to work with relatives and existing relationships, that we have thrived and we have grown and we have established new teams. And so I found that something that I suppose it's in the core, but it stuck with me. The other thing that I feel has really been a blessing and has supported my last 10 years in terms of keeping a sense of growth and enjoying what I do has been that we are able to form partnerships. And I don't know where the Navigators got that idea from. And I'm not even sure that there is, if you're going to think about the scriptural roots and all those things we like to talk about, biblical foundations, I don't know that I could say here's the verse and here's the chapter, but I discovered that when we are able in EMAS, when we are able to work with other organizations or work with churches, somehow God multiplies and increases that. And I just saw that in the Philippines recently. And I'm seeing this in Zimbabwe, where we're looking at the fellowship there, the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, most of whom are Christians, that going out and finding fellow believers or finding a local church and partnering with that local church to then launch the gospel in the community through healthcare, that is such a stabilizing factor. It's such a grounding that I have determined that EMAS will not go anywhere and start something in isolation. We just have to find local partners. And I remember that from my Navigator days, how important it was to have those partnerships. So perhaps these are principles, perhaps these are just things that God kind of puts in your DNA, but they stay with you. And I'm looking at helping some of our leaders with succession planning. But it's really about passing on the ministry to others. And so I'm looking for a Timothy again. That's what I'm trusting God for currently. Yes. We go to a church that is walking distance from our house. And so it's, again, one of the joys that comes out of my youth in the Lord, that I always try to be part of a Bible study. Sometimes I lead it, sometimes I'm just a member, but currently I'm leading a Bible study. So we're there on the Wednesdays. Most of our prayers are for grandchildren and our children, and some of our non-Christian friends. But yeah, and you know what? The things that were foundational to the basics, the prayer and fellowship, and sharing the gospel and studying the word, those things. I don't see the wheel illustration very much these days, but I have one on the wall here. It's too small for me to show you because it's a tiny little one. But those things have not changed for me. In our little Bible study, we are 8 guys. This was we do exactly the things that I did with Buyu, Peter, and Moses and Ambrose in 1975. I haven't introduced scripture memory because people are rather, busy. But I share with them and I say this is what helps me, to keep track, and that's a tool. But the core, we pray. I occasionally get to man to man, which is a great joy when I get together with one of these guys from time to time. Sometimes they get to do one-to-one with me because I'm the one who needs it. We are peers now, obviously, but those things have not changed. And so little by little we continue, and we do those things that we learned when we were young, and we trust God that He will eventually give fruit. Right. If anything has kept me grounded, I think it was the message that I must continue to pursue Jesus. There have been hard times, and there have been times when I wasn't as connected with the Navigators or with a meaningful group of Christians, connected with a group of Christians who were speaking truth and bringing scriptures into my life. They were brief, but they've been there. But because I've had this conviction, I have to pursue Jesus personally. I have to love Him for myself because He has loved me. That has kept me grounded, and it has caused me to look for help. And almost invariably, the first place I've looked for help is with the Navigators or somebody who I think might be Navigator-like or Navigator-minded. So it has helped me look for the right kind of church when I've needed it. Once I've needed to do that here. I think that's it, really. That I must personally pursue Jesus and love Him because He has loved me. I think that's the one thing that has kept me grounded. And when I have pursued him, I found that he has given me the right community, the right fellowship. And somehow Navigators keep popping up, somehow. But that's anyway. That's So what about the people that we grew up with and walked with? Not all of them have walked with Christ. There are a few people who, for reasons I cannot explain, seem to have abandoned the faith and went ways that we would say are sinful and disobedient. They're not many. I can think of maybe 2, maybe 3. For the others, everyone seems so solid. Everyone seems so deeply connected with the Lord and going strong. So here's an example. So when after Noel Nelson asked me for a Timothy, I did find a Timothy. I did walk with this guy, and then university took him to the U.S. University took me to Nairobi. We did not meet for nearly 12 years. And then one day we met, and he said, yes, he's walking with the Lord, but he was such a busy businessman that I just didn't get a chance to go deep. So imagine from 75, 10 years would have been 85 to 85. And I didn't see him again until 2004. I met him at a petrol station. I said, hey, good to see you. And he says, of course. He invites me to his house. And it happened to be a time when my family and I were in Nairobi. So I took the whole family, my 3 children and wife, went to visit this guy. And he started telling his children that the reason he was telling them and teaching them to have a quiet time was because I helped him when we were young and we were together in Nairobi school. So since 85, he had been walking with God, and he had brought his children up to have quiet times because I had helped him I had taught him to have a quiet time. And he was involved in church, and he was an elder and participating in one of the Anglican churches in Nairobi. So I think this is the blessing of going deep in the scriptures, the way the Navigators invest deeply in people. That God is faithful to his word, and these people are established. I posted the other day about running into a guy who was cycling with me here in Ontario. He's actually with the Navigators. I did not know. And it was a strange chance encounter. But digging deeper, apparently was on the board of the Navigators the year that I resigned. And he was leading a Bible study, and some of the people he led in the Bible study are peripherally acquainted with me. Anyway, no, it's I think when people walk with God using the tools that we are blessed to have, you have examples like Noel Owor, you have people like Elijah Omobe in Eldoret. These are people who are godly, who most of them stay. These are trees that are well grounded and bear fruit well into their old age. Yes.